All right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm Joanne Kaufman with the Warehouse District Business Association, as well as the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. We're going to hear from Becky Alper this morning. Becky Alper leads employer research outreach, at Move Minneapolis, consulting with businesses on transportation challenges. She specializes in providing a policy and programmatic path towards a more sustainable future with measurable results. Becky led behavior change programming for St. Paul Smart Trips and Move Minnesota for 5 years, focusing on both employer-based programs and neighborhood efforts. She holds both a master's and bachelor's degree from Clark University, and she won the Association for Commuter Transportation's 40 Under 40 Award in 2018 and currently serves as the Midwest Chapter's president. Welcome, Becky. We'll let you take it away, and I know you've got some colleagues here this morning as well. So,
great. Thank you so much, Joanne, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just a minute. Let's see here. All right. Does it look okay for you? Perfect.
Looks great.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. It's a real pleasure to be here today to talk about telework and making sure that telework is working for you. I know a lot of us, including our team at Move Minneapolis and at the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, had a rapid transition this past March to telework. And now's a great time to take a step back, reflect on what's working, and think about how to make it even better. Let me tell you a little bit about us. We are a transportation management organization. We serve the city of Minneapolis with a special focus on downtown employers and commuters. Our purpose is to reduce transportation emissions, and we concentrate on decreasing drive-alone trips. We consult on commuter benefits, transit, shared mobility, biking, and walking. And if you're a downtown Minneapolis employer and haven't worked with us yet, we would love to hear from you. I'm tuning in. This is a actual both my background and the in the presentation are pictures I took. I'm tuning in from beautiful Puerto Rico. I'm here doing remote work for the next for a couple months, I should say. And I, along with others of the Move Minneapolis team, we have been living and breathing remote work for the last 9 months. And in fact, we've researched it and we've written a guide to remote work, telework strategies for success anywhere. I welcome you downloading it. My colleague, Alex Burns, will put that in the chat. And the good news is if you're on today's webinar, you don't have to read this 45-page document because I am going to give you all the tips and tricks and possibly a couple things more. And we welcome your ideas and feedback to make sure that our guide is reflective of the ever-changing reality. So you might be asking yourself at this point, why remote work? Why does Move Minneapolis care about remote work? So let's take a look at what happened this spring. In March, we saw and over the course of this spring, with the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a dramatic reduction in trips as offices sent people to work from home. And just look at that, 2020 versus 2019, a huge reduction in traffic on Minnesota's highways. And this happened across the country and across the world, and it had a huge impact on emissions and our air quality around the world. And so for us, thinking about remote work, our focus really is around the sustainability and the commute. And so we've seen that no commute at all can in fact decrease overall car trips taken. So that's why we're in the business of remote work, but there's lots of other reasons too. I want to go over just a couple more. look at the savings for employees, for example. The average driver drives around 12,000 miles per year. So if you're not driving to work, that could be a huge cost savings to you. We've seen evidence that employees are between 13 and 25% more productive when working from home. Real estate savings, you can save $10,000 per year per employee in reduced real estate costs. And my favorite one at present is the reduced community costs, which is a really interesting concept. So think about the cost of expanding highway infrastructure to accommodate free flow rush hour commutes. It can cost millions of dollars per lane mile to expand a highway. And keeping up existing infrastructure is nothing small either. Like, take, for example, in 2019, MnDOT allocated $133 million for winter maintenance. So if we can decrease, we all stand to gain as taxpayers by reduced community costs from telework. I would like to, before I go too much further, I just want to acknowledge that, have a full acknowledgement that some jobs are better suited to remote work than others. We have examples. This is pulled directly from the guide of some jobs that work well with remote work. So today, I'm getting to the meat of it. I want to talk about 20-ish tips, I should say, to do telework better. And I'm certain, I didn't do an exact count, and there are ones that I bet that you have thought of too that work for you. And I welcome you putting that into the chat as we go forward, and we can have a discussion at the end. So to start out, I really want to recommend getting a good office setup. And hopefully you have this by now if you're working from home now, 9 months into the pandemic. But if you don't, these are some things to work on soon. So, you know, ergonomics, get a good chair, find a place where you can focus. Good light is important, make it cozy, and make it a place you'd like to be. And another interesting tip that we found out in our research is not just make it cozy, get a plant. That plants have been shown to help productivity and keep you happier, even fake ones. So I'm going to go into my first poll of the presentation. So I'd like to ask you all to go to speedtest.net. Let's check your internet speed. And I'm going to leave it open for just a little while you are figuring out what your speed is, because getting the right amount of internet is super important. I'm curious to see if anybody's under 10 megabytes per second. You know, some things to keep in mind is that typically we've seen that you need a minimum download speed of 25 megabytes to do remote work. 50 is better once you have multiple people. Another rule of thumb is about 10 megabytes per second download per person surfing the internet. And of course, it can depend on if you're doing video calls or working with high resolution files and doing a lot of uploading and downloading. All right, so we've got a few people in here. I think let's close out the poll. Let's see how people have ended, what results we got. All right, so vast majority have more than 50 megabytes per second. So if you're one of the three in that 10 to 25 megabytes, I'm curious to know, put it in the chat, does your internet work well for you? Something to consider. Maybe that's something you need to work on. So we can stop those results and let's keep going. Maybe I can do that. Let's see. Oh, there we go. All right. So I talked about this. Those are some things that you need to know. And by the way, this will be recorded, so you can always come back and look at it at another point in time. All right, let's move right along. Security. Information security is a serious concern. We know that it's important for teleworkers who handle sensitive information. But when structured properly, telework should not create a significantly greater concern than is currently the case in the office. So take a case in point, I think, would be passwords. Strong passwords matter just as much at the office as they matter at home. My colleague Alex is putting the link to this guide in the chat, so check it out. Make sure you've got all those things set on your end. Effectively managing electronic documents and reducing paper is another key element of successful telework. Think back to when you left the office in a hurry last spring. Do you even remember those paper files that you left behind? I certainly don't. So I think a lot of us would be surprised at how much we could do without. So it really starts with standardizing your file structure. And the good news here is that it doesn't really matter what structure you use, as long as you pick one and you stick with it and make sure everybody's on board. Make sure you have a plan for record retention and files that you definitely shouldn't get rid of. Thinking of financials, financial history in this case. All right, so now that you hopefully don't have to think about how to fit all your paper files into your new home, your home office, let's talk about essential equipment. We've got this in the guide. So again, go to that link and you can download the full remote work guide to get all of this information. But I want to highlight two things here that I found, or that we have found really useful. So one is a cable management box. It reduces liability. It can help make your office look better. It can reduce tripping hazards and possible workers' comp claims. So that's important. And then also good lighting. And I'll go into that. I want to say that's really important for video calls, and it's nice for the ambiance and the atmosphere that you create in your home office. I've got two working methods that I want to share with you. One's the burstiness, and that's the concept of blocking out a big chunk of uninterrupted quiet time. I think it's the element of distraction in telework can be something really difficult. You've got all these different management tools that are possible for contacting people. So really protecting those quiet times against intrusions is so important. So that's kind of the idea of burstiness. That's one thing to think about to be more productive. And then the Pomodoro technique, I've tried it. Our team has tried elements of it. It's definitely, some people really subscribe to it. 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. You do 4 rounds of this, and then you take a longer break. And that, of course, is the infamous Pomodoro timer in the upper right. I also highly recommend video calls. I know at the beginning of the pandemic, I would be on calls with people who didn't have a video camera, and it makes it a lot easier to connect with people when you have video. You can see facial expressions, you can read intonations better. So here's just one example of us on a outreach video call. I highly recommend it, especially in small groups, for being able to connect with your coworkers and colleagues. Obviously, I'm using a background today. Backgrounds are great techniques. Joanne has put herself on mute. So, you know, there are all these features. There's an annotate feature. So many things you can do with video calls, and I recommend using those to the fullest extent possible. Managing others is another piece of our guide that we touch on. And I want to focus on two pieces to really be successful within telework. So one of them is about providing context. Nothing is worse than getting a cryptic message over Teams from your boss asking for a chat at 4 p.m., you know, later on in the day. So it's, especially in a remote environment, it's so important to provide context. So to say, hey, can we check in at 4 p.m. to talk about that draft report you sent over and XYZ section, you know, something like that. Providing context can really help. And then outcomes focused, and this is less of a butts and seats mentality. Focus on really what you want out of a project. And that's so important in building trust with remote workers. What's the goal of the project? What form does the outcome take? When's the deadline? What's the budget? What's the definition of done? So this is something we really recommend moving towards in telework. Another key tip is using calendar tools to your advantage. So at Move Minneapolis, we have core hours where the whole team is available. So our example, one example would be like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then we allow for flex time, on the different start and finish times, and also in the middle too. So I'll talk more about that too. And I think all these things can lead to happier, healthier, and more productive teleworkers. Just one moment. So communication, again, is so critical. We loved this concept that we found from Trello, which is a project management software. They brought up this idea of a communications charter, which is a living, breathing set of expectations around communications. So for example, it might be, we use video conferencing for scheduled daily check-in meetings, but we use IM when something is urgent. So here, managers really need to set expectations for frequency and length and ideal timing of communication for their teams. Everybody has different things that work well for them, and it's playing to those strengths and understanding what works well as a team here. So let's move into our second poll. Does your company have a communications charter? Let's see if we can get that pulled up. We'll leave a little bit of time for voting. So another thing I want to share here is, again, going more into it, communications charter. It can describe how to use essential communications tools. It can talk about online meeting solutions, file sharing. It could even include an org chart with personnel titles and lines of authority. So all those things I would say would go under a communications charter. All right, we've got a lot of votes in. Let's end the polling. Wow, I read it the wrong way for a minute. I thought, wow, so many people have communications charters. Okay, so the answer is no, opposite of that. Okay, about 70% do not have a communications charter and 30% do. So this is something to consider. Let's stop that, and we'll move on. And I'm going to share a little later why it might be important to have a communications charter, or we could also call it a communications cheat sheet. So we're a few months into this, and I recently attended an event about connecting intentionally in a virtual format, and so important. And so something that we found is that these making space for one-to-one and small group meetings is really key to allowing people to connect, because in a virtual format, when you have these big group meetings, you really don't have these opportunities for these informal chats, or and be like, hey, nice job the other day. It suddenly shared with the whole group. You can't just hop over a cube wall and talk to your coworker or chat at the lunchroom. You have to really be intentional about it. And then that goes hand in hand with not multitasking. And some of you might think, what? How can I do that? I have so many meetings. I have to multitask. I have to look at my email and my, other communications channels while I'm in meetings. And I have a tip for that. So especially when you're in these small groups, a one-on-one meeting, don't resist that urge to multitask. Look into the eyes of your other, really listen into the other people who are in that meeting with you. Just one moment. So again, teamwork, building camaraderie, it can be so challenging. So Keep those communication lines open, use all the tools available to you. All right, another thing here, we have to prevent stress and overwork. And 2020 has definitely been a challenging year. So here are some main tips for how to prevent stress and overwork. So starting with, use your project management tools and create, to your best ability, and create a to-do tomorrow list at the end of the day, and then purge those ideas from your mind so you're not constantly dwelling on what you have left to do. Another thing here is to ask for help. If teammates and your managers don't know that you're struggling, they're not going to be able to help you. And then close your laptop at the end of the day and resist that temptation to log back on. Also, shorten those meetings to work smarter. Why have a 60-minute meeting when it could be 15 minutes or 10 or an IM message? So this goes back to the idea of connecting intentionally. It's easier not to multitask when your meetings have a purpose and don't take as much time. It's a lot of sitting with telework, and I want to, especially if you're in front of a computer and you have lots of meetings. So it's so important now to make new habits. Maybe you were driving to work and now you don't have that 45-minute commute. So use that commute time and go take a walk around the block, or hop on an exercise bike. Or, the days are short also. So make use of that flex time that you have, and take an hour at lunch and go for a run. And then maybe you work a little bit more, extend your day to make up for that time that you took when it was light out and it wasn't, our winters. When I am back in Minnesota, which I will be in January, it gets dark so early. So that's one benefit of telework. So I want to briefly touch on remote onboardings and terminations, but before I add just a couple tips, I want to say there's going to be a really great webinar from an HR professional tomorrow talking about hiring practices in the virtual age. Check out the link in the chat that my colleague just put there. But it's a free webinar. It's part of this series, and I think it'll go into a lot more depth. A couple tips I want to give you. Remember that communications cheat sheet or the charter. This is something you can include as part of your onboarding materials. And then that equipment checklist, attach it to your new hire letter. Remote terminations also, do this as a video conference call. Consider recording it. Be ready with all the paperwork afterwards, and to disconnect someone's access. And then hire a third party to collect company-owned equipment. I can't end a webinar on telework without talking about taxes. My favorite topic as a non-accountant. But it's so important to know that when, here I am in Puerto Rico briefly, but we've got Hawaii has a remote work program, Bermuda, the country of Georgia, but all these things can impact payroll taxes, and it can be very complex with working really remotely. So these are things to keep in mind, check internally with before you go forth, but don't forget them. And then on the positive note about taxes, telework expenses, such as setting up a home office or increased utility expenses or higher internet costs due to now working from home, these are not subject to income or payroll tax withholding. This is because COVID-19 was declared an emergency, a federal disaster back in March. And so a company can make disaster payments towards those items. So that's a positive thing. So I want to move into talking about the future, well, both the present and the future. We have seen, we've experienced a huge rapid change here in our society with telework. People are working from home 8 times as much as pre-pandemic in the Twin Cities. That's huge. This came from a May 2020 survey of about 3,000 people from the Metropolitan Council. And the data in here is very similar to what I've been hearing from Twin City area employers this fall too. So let's take a look at it. So follow your eyes with the dark blue. So if you see 12% pre-outbreak, we're working 5 days a week from home. And then now you look, there are 48% of respondents working as of May, working 5 days a week from home. And they anticipate, the anticipated number, 38% will continue to work from home in the future. So 12 to 48 to 38, wow, that's huge. So basically 12% work from home to now 38% in the future. That's going to transform, I think, our society. And then if you look at the light blue, that's 2 to 4 days a week from home. And again, in the future, the people's preferences for telework are definitely there. And there's a huge preference for a mix of the office and working, combining it with working from home. So we at Move Minneapolis really are hopeful for a more sustainable future with reduced vehicle miles traveled. All right, and you may be thinking, okay, so I'm working from home now and it looks a little like this top picture. I've got kids around me and distractions and I never leave the house. But now I really want you to imagine this post-pandemic future, okay, where everything is peaceful. You can go to your apartment's co-working space or your favorite coffee shop. Your boss tells you you can work as much as you want from home. Your kids are back in school and you're not supervising their, 3rd grade. What are your plans? What are your plans for future telework? Let's go into our 3rd poll. Just give it a moment. How much would you like to work from home in the future? And let's see if the answers here, we're going to leave it open just a little bit longer. Let's see here if the answers here mimic what the Metropolitan Council survey said. I'm curious to see. Okay, I think let's close it out. All right, so we've got a sort of a bell chart of a mix, a little lower on the ends with the 0 and the 5 days a week. 3 days a week telework is the winner in this very informal poll, which is not statistically significant. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's great to know. And I think with that, that was my last slide. We welcome you sharing your tips and thoughts, and I'll turn it back over to you at this time, Joanne.
Thank you, Becky. I think we can all agree that was very informative. I actually took some notes myself. If you've got questions, please put them in the chat and we'll give people a moment or two. I know that I think the communications charter, I find that so fascinating, and so much of what you said was true. Can you speak a little bit more on that, on how organizations might start that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a communications charter, my thought on how it works is that your team comes together and has a discussion about what methods of communication work best for them and under what circumstances, and reaches a consensus on how you'd like to work as a team. For example, maybe daily stand-ups are, I'm making things up here, but maybe a daily 15-minute meeting, it works best for people. And then the rest of it is through a Teams channels, or maybe it's determined that a video call is most appropriate for certain types of meetings, but not for others.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, another question too that I have is, you brought up a really good point about shortening meetings. And yet one of the things that I know that we're all missing is that face-to-face time. And so much of what now we're finding, or at least I'm finding, is that we may have an hour scheduled and the first 10 minutes are, oh, how was your weekend? How, you know, what's going on? Did it, you know, it's a beautiful day, that kind of, how do you suggest that we kind of, because we miss that, we miss that water cooler talk, if you will. We don't have that anymore, and perhaps never will again. And yet we still want to maintain those connections with our coworkers. Any suggestions with that?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of options. I think having a channel which is just for fun, just for that social interaction would be a great step, so that you know, people could put their pictures there, their recipes there, and then kind of like a pre-information sharing, and then also to schedule some social time that's again goes back to that idea of you know, how to have a better meeting, to make the purpose explicit. This meeting is about catching up, or this meeting is our game club. I'm not sure, you know, something like that. And then just keep them shorter. I mean, that is my number one recommendation. You can still incorporate a couple minutes of social time in a regular meeting, but to be intentional about it. And I know something that I've really enjoyed with our chamber meetings, Joanne, is having that small group time right at the beginning of our all staff meetings. Yes. And that, again, it has a time limit, because Zoom and their breakout rooms has, you set that timer and you're all, you teleported back to the main room. So I think there are a lot of ways to do it, and experimenting with it, trying some things, seeing what works, and things might change over the course. It's a living and breathing document, I think, to let it change.
Thank you. And then how do you recommend that supervisors go to an outcomes-based style, and what kind of project management software programs available, and how do you use them?
Yeah, great question. So we have, again, experimented with a number of different ways. We started out using notes tools within SharePoint, a shared notes document, and looking at who had what on their plate and our work plan. And then we tried Trello for a little while. That's one project management software that has some nice calendar and list features. And then right now we are using Asana, so another tool there. But again, I think it's trying to make sure as a supervisor to have an outcomes-based style, to build that relationship of trust with your employee, to focus on the deliverable. So when is it due? What form does it take? Here's the amount of budget that you have to get it done, to really kind of paint that picture, and then trust that they're going to work towards it, with, of course, you checking in on it frequently.
And then how do you work, you know, with security issues around the various, you know, platforms that you're using and access? You know, are you recommending that employers provide hardware so that people aren't using their personal computers? What are your recommendations surrounding that in a telework policy?
Yeah, well, I think that company provided, I mean, if you're doing work, that it should be company provided equipment. But spelling it out really clearly in your telework policy is really important. I think there are issues that you run into. It's a tricky subject now because so many people are working at home, but spelling it out, emphasizing safe use. What does this look like? I mean, I'm not really at the beach right now. I would be getting sand in my computer. That would be bad. So then it wouldn't work anymore.
Right.
This is a company laptop. So I'm not going to do that, and I signed a policy before coming here about that. So I think being really clear, again, going back to communication, so important to address things, readdress things, put it down on paper.
Awesome. And then what do you think will happen to the 40-hour work week?
Oh, good question. I kind of hope that it disappears. Personally, I think, but I also think that we need to be real careful with that stress and overwork piece. That's really hard to say. I think companies that have moved to kind of an outcomes focused mentality. I mean, if you're really good and you can get your work done in 30 hours, great, great. As long as you're, available to your teammates within those core hours, maybe that's okay.
It feels like, I know that, and I feel like I saw something on the news about this recently too, like we're actually working more right now because we're always at work, right? Because if we're working remotely at home, we're always at work. And I know I'm guilty myself of maybe, at 5 doing something with my family and then at 8 o'clock getting back online and sending emails.
Right.
So creating those boundaries.
And that I think it goes back to this again, Joanne, to set those boundaries and, both with your team and with yourself, that temptation, create that to-do list for tomorrow and say, I'm done, and really to close your laptop and sign out. And I find that hard too. So yeah, I totally get it. But I think to be healthier, happier employees, to create a little space between working and not working is once you find that nice balance, I think it can be good. I think there's a future for telework in which we're not just stuck at home all day. I mean, our telework just means we might not be at the office. We might be, like I said, working from that coffee shop or co-working space or, that sort of thing.
Yep. And how can telework improve equity in business operations? For example, how much money will people save in commuting? And so that's no longer an expense that they have.
Yeah, well, the average cost of owning a car, according to AAA, can easily be, I believe the latest figures are somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 a year. I mean, it depends on what type of car you have. But if you don't have to come into the office, I think that's huge because barrier to car ownership is really expensive. So I think it can help improve people's personal finances. And then also one of the other benefits of remote work is increased access to a talent pool that, maybe it doesn't have to be somebody who is within 30 miles of the work site. It could be somebody who lives 500 miles from the work site if it's a talented employee. So I hope that can help. I think also looking at an outcomes-based, a kind of an outcomes-focused style, I hope would help with issues of equity in business operations. So those are just some thoughts.
In one of our peer-to-peer roundtable sessions yesterday, the comment was raised that it used to be that when employees said to companies, I want to work remotely, the business may have said, that's fine, and that's great, but it takes you out of, you no longer be in line for maybe a promotion or to move up in the company because you won't have that face-to-face contact anymore with the rest of the team. Are you seeing that change as people are going to a more, and as I think as we come out of this, as the unscientific poll showed that people are planning on doing some sort of telework on the other side of this, whenever that may be. So are you seeing that change, that we're no longer limiting our potential and our futures by working remotely?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm grateful to Mary for pointing out that from our informal poll, that only 8% of us will not telework at all in the future. So, that's huge. I mean, maybe even if it's just 2 days a week working from home, I mean, that's okay, let's see if I do my math right. That's a 40% reduction in car trips. Wait a minute. There we go.
Yeah.
Yes. So we're, that's great for sustainability. And absolutely, I think getting away from this kind of like butts in seats mentality is important for work. And we've seen that remote workers are more productive than it can increase productivity, I should say. So I've also seen some stuff, I didn't put it in here, about innovation, that telework does not stifle innovation. So I think, yes, absolutely, getting away from that mentality of if you don't come into the office, you're not in line for a promotion.
How has working really, really remotely for you personally, how has that worked? And do you recommend it others to try it over the winter?
Oh, great question.
How did you get permission to do this?
Oh yeah, well, I asked first. So I said, I'd like to do this. And I asked far in advance of my actual travel dates, which gave us time to think about some of these critical issues, like, hey, how are you going to keep your computer secure? How are you going to handle that? One of the benefits of working from where I am right now, ironically, is that the internet service is fabulous, better than I have at my house in Minneapolis. So that's been a real plus. I mean, I think there are things to consider. It's far away from one's community. I mean, I think it's nice. There's been a great New York Times article recently about remote work. And they had some interesting points in it. I can do a little Google search, but yeah, I think it's nice for a change. It's been really nice. And I think it really opens up the realm of possibilities for people in a way that weren't when we were tied down to an office. And I think we're still able to connect with our teammates in a similar fashion to before. Again, connecting intentionally. You have to be intentional about connections in a virtual environment.
And then how will telework impact rural community, rural and suburban? I know that I live in Minneapolis, but I know that my neighborhood restaurants are having a better than anticipated, well, before they had to close completely other than to go, but doing okay because we were all working remotely and we were visiting our neighborhood businesses for lunch where we used to go downtown. So do you think that downtowns, other than in big cities like downtown Minneapolis, that this is a potential revival for them?
Yes, for restaurants, you're saying, or I definitely think it's
downtowns in general. I'm just using that as an example, but
I mean, I think it could be great for towns like Wilmer, Brainerd, Duluth. Maybe Duluth is too big for that, but absolutely, because I think small towns have a form of community that a lot of people enjoy. And what has kept them there before? I'm guessing it's broadband internet, which I know a lot of people are working on across greater Minnesota. And then also the fact that they're tied to an office that's located at a headquarters in Minneapolis. So I think that's huge for kind of a renaissance of some of these little communities, which have been losing population over the last, I don't know how many decades. And then I think it could be a renaissance for downtown Minneapolis too. You know, what if firms didn't need all the space they have now, and it could be repurposed as housing, which we so desperately need in the city. So we could have more people living in downtown, which in turn would, like you mentioned with your local neighborhoods, the kind of the business, the restaurants, they're seeing a bit of a uptick in sales. I think it could be similar in downtown Minneapolis.
Do you think that businesses will give up their space or just repurpose it so they're better able to socially distance for when people are back in the office, using their space in a different way?
Yeah, I've seen both.
Okay.
Frankly, you know, I've hearing from Minneapolis companies. I've seen ones that maybe their lease is coming up soon, and they say, "Hey, we don't need this much space, or we need a different type of space. We need one for collaboration. We like how telework is going. We're gonna fully fund our employees to telework. You know, give back some of that savings from real estate." So that's one option. Just get a co-working space. Or I've heard, you know, remodeling our existing space to fit this new post-pandemic anticipated future where people are coming in for those key times to face-to-face collaboration and bonding, and not less of the, okay, I'm going to be that worker bee in the office.
And then, so along that same line, should employers be responsible for their employees' telework costs, whether it's rent, whether it's internet? And I suppose some of that goes into the communications chart, but what's the common practice for as far as reimbursement and for those types of things?
Yeah, and I would say that's separate actually from a communications charter. I think that would be sort of more, again, in the telework policy and benefits. It's definitely a time to rethink benefits. I mean, companies that were paying $250 a month for employee parking, certainly that's not needed right now. I mean, I think, and there are huge savings in real estate that isn't being used. There's one company I know of that came to our last webinar that we held about, that Move Minneapolis held about real estate, post-pandemic future of real estate, that said they saved so much money over the last 6 months that they gave it back to employees as a bonus.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that I think employees really do stand to gain with that piece. And I should say about the remote work, we're happy to make available our kind of policy template for that. And then hopefully, I believe up in the chat a little bit, my colleague Alex put in the human resources guide article about employers making disaster payments to COVID affected employees. So again, sort of similar to commuter benefits being tax-free, or some of them being tax-free, and the same applies with these COVID telework disaster benefits.
And then you did touch on this briefly, but can you expand maybe a little bit more about how you fire someone remotely? Because unfortunately, that does happen. Yes.
Yeah. I think being prepared is a huge key. And we've got that whole piece in the guide. We've got at least one page on remote terminations, having a standard script, using a video call. Don't do if you have to do a mass layoff, don't do a mass video call have it be heartfelt. Do it one-on-one with people. You know, you might want to include an HR representative in that meeting. Be ready to go right when that meeting finishes. Have all the COBRA paperwork ready. Have your IT ready to disconnect all the server access and other things that they have access to. So I think those are some keys. And then again, if they're working from home, don't send a company representative to pick up the company-owned equipment. Send a third party.
And so many of our companies these days don't have HR departments or people. Who do you recommend be that person, not just in firing, but in maybe starting the process of creating a policy, creating communication charters, all of that? Who would be that person in a
Yeah.
smaller company that doesn't necessarily have an HR department or even an HR person?
Yeah, so maybe in a smaller company, kind of like our like ours.
I wasn't thinking of that, but
Yeah, yeah, great point. I mean, some of that, I think perhaps the finance person has that hat with some of the policies, but especially if it's a smaller company, I think, part of that idea of building trust among employees is allowing people who maybe it's not their job and maybe they're they've only worked there for 2 years, or they're 6 months into their position, this is their first job. Let them lean in to talk about what benefits matter to them, because certainly if you're offering some benefit as a company that people don't know about or don't want, why offer that? Offer something they care about. And so I think having sort of a group opportunity to lean in and form come up with some of those ideas for those policies is a really great way to lead as an organization.
maybe it can be a meeting scheduled with a purpose and ongoing,
Right.
until that policy is established.
Right. And I would also say give people some pre-meeting work so that they come into it already having done a little brainstorming about what policies matter to them, so that when the actual meeting is happening about that, you don't have to take time for that, which again can lead to more intentional
Yep.
meetings with less multitasking.
Becky, thank you so much. This has been so informative today. I think telework, we're so fortunate to have the tools that we do have, and we learn more each day, as I know we all have this morning. And who would have thought 10 months ago that we would be in this place that we are now? But it allows us the opportunity to change the way we do business, and perhaps and help our environment. As there's so many other pieces that go along with that, right? And you've probably heard me say, I love COVID air because my asthma has lessened considerably because there are fewer emissions, and I can really feel that the air quality has changed. So I really appreciate your being here this morning. And I think telework is really changing the way we do business, and you've been very informative. So thank you very much. We will be sending this out to those who have signed up for today, and the telework manual that Move Minneapolis has is available to you, and we'll send that link out with the recording.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.